The studio lights of CNN burned brightly, not only in wattage, but in expectation. A typical Friday evening panel was about to be set ablaze into something remarkable. Across from one another, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She arrived with decades of political sophistication. He, with courtroom intensity forged through decades of civil rights fights. As soon as Anderson Cooper launched the segment, you could sense that something was different. You could almost smell the static in the air. And within a few minutes, TV history would be made, not through theatrics, but through facts so cutting they cut through decades of political spin. But what made a run-of-the-mill debate into the year's most viral political confrontation? Stay tuned, because this is not only a moment, it's a masterclass. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, full of swagger and drawing on her time behind the Trump White House podium, made a brazen, legally incorrect assertion about constitutional law. What she didn't know. Opposite her was somebody who spends every waking moment studying the Constitution. Jasmine Crockett, calm and collected, was engaged, not for a battle, but for a correction that would send shockwaves nationwide. With 15 years of civil rights litigation experience under her belt, Crockett was ready. Her answer wasn't boisterous. It wasn't indignant. It was tight. And in 30 seconds, it was glaringly apparent. The governor had stepped into a constitutional realm far beyond her skill. Stay with it, because what follows isn't just a correction. It's a moment that law professors will teach for decades. Behind the cameras, even the crew sensed it. Camera operators shifted their positions, feeling something seismic was about to happen. Sanders relaxed back with the confident air of a veteran politician. Crockett hunched forward, all prosecutor, every sentence honed from years in the courtroom. And then, it did. Within a minute, Crockett tore down the governor's whole argument. Not with insults, not with rhetoric, but with constitutional law so sharp and precise that it silenced Sanders. By the time it went on the air, Harvard to Yale law professors were weighing in and concurring. This wasn't just a victory. This was a teardown of epic proportions. This wasn't a debate. This was a demolition, and you're about to see why it went viral across 50 million screens. Social media exploded. The clip shattered engagement records, trending globally under tags like #CrockettSchoolSanders. From think tanks to classrooms in Europe, people watched in awe as a congresswoman wielded legal knowledge like a surgeon's scalpel. The message? Expertise matters. And when used right, it changes everything. Crockett didn't merely make headlines. She became a symbol for truth, for justice, for a new generation of leaders who won't tolerate misinformation just because it comes with a smile. Balance scale. Who is Jasmine Crockett, anyway? And why was this confrontation more than just a momentary coincidence? Let's dive in. At 43, Jasmine Crockett is a new generation of Democratic leadership. Before becoming a political force to be reckoned with, she was in the trenches, fighting for ordinary Americans against systems set up to muzzle them. A fiery Dallas lawyer, she forged her own path one case at a time, fighting for voting rights, workers, and criminal justice reform. Her arrival in Congress wasn't due to political tradition or behind-the-scenes bargains. It was the result of determination, principle, and uncompromising commitment to the Constitution. In the state legislature of Texas, she was already famous for bold questioning, particularly when dealing with those who thought they could coast through. And that fire in the courtroom? It never dissipated. This wasn't merely a conflict between two women. This was a collision between smooth politics and unapologetic reality. As the dust settles on this memorable encounter, one thing is clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't merely win an argument. She redefined what political discourse is supposed to sound like: educated, rooted, and unapologetically biting. If moments like these give you goosebumps, if you think political accountability needs to be accompanied by legal literacy, subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Give this video a thumbs up, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss these pivotal moments in democracy. Because as this showdown demonstrated, when facts come into the room, spin doesn't even stand a chance. Do you want one that's shorter, similar to TikTok, or a caption to accompany the video post? But what most set apart Jasmine Crockett wasn't her background. It was her lightning-fast memory of constitutional language. She could recite particular clauses from memory, leaving even seasoned lawmakers speechless in their seats as she threw precise legal quotes in the moment. It wasn't impressive, it was almost surgical. Her grasp of constitutional law earned her accolades from law scholars at institutions such as the University of Texas and Southern Methodist University, who began publicly remarking on her ability to cut through political spin with unyielding legal precision. Balance scale, and if you think that sounds potent, wait until you hear what occurred when she went to work on a voter suppression bill with the surgical precision of a legal scalpel. In a pivotal session of the Texas legislature, Crockett systematically took apart a voter suppression bill. How? By invoking 14 separate Supreme Court decisions, each one expertly chosen, each one falling with crushing impact. By the time she finished destroying the bill, the authors of the legislation had nothing to say. The bill was pulled. No drama. Just facts. That courtroom expertise was no campaign slogan talking point. It was the highlight of her congressional bid. Her commercials weren't based on catchphrases. They featured her in federal court, working with one strong slogan: send a lawyer to do a lawyer's job. The voters reacted. She didn't merely win. She won by the greatest margin ever for her district. Balance scale, and then she arrived in Washington. She didn't miss a step. Crockett soon became the go-to voice of the House Democrats on constitutional law, a sort of unofficial guardian of the integrity of policy for the law. Her career in the law isn't merely impressive on paper. It's directly applicable to the political battlefields of today. Voting rights, civil liberties, state statutes colliding with federal protections. Crockett has argued them all and prevailed. This isn't theoretical backroom talk. It's real-world experience tempered in the crucible of courtroom wars. But to see why this is so important, you have to consider the contrast, because her opponent in this indelible CNN moment couldn't be further from her. Let's discuss Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and why her style of politics crashed so spectacularly into real constitutional law. At 41, Sanders is the quintessential product of Trump-era Republicanism. The daughter of ex-Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, she was essentially bred in the corridors of right-wing politics. Her early exposure to campaigns on the national stage provided her with a profound sense of political theater, and working as Donald Trump's press secretary elevated it to another plane. For almost 2 years, Sanders stood at the White House podium defending one of the most polarizing presidencies in U.S. history. Love her or loathe her, she was a relentless defender, infamous for her combative press briefings and devotion to Trump's agenda. That exposure made her a conservative celebrity. To her allies, she was a warrior. To detractors, an unrelenting spin machine. But erase the one part that's too often forgotten. She has zero legal training. And that's not a footnote. It's the fault line which would split wide open under the strain of her confrontation with Crockett. While Sanders became adept at messaging and media spin, constitutional law was never part of her arsenal. In most careers, that may not be a cause for alarm. But as governor, the stakes are significantly higher. She's personally accountable for laws that need to pass federal constitutional muster. And more, they don't. Having exited the Trump administration in a cloud of scandal, Sanders leveraged her national recognition and the imprimatur of an endorsement from Trump himself to make a gubernatorial bid in Arkansas. She swept into office by a landslide, surfing the wave of MAGA devotion on the promise to bring Trump's agenda to the states. And she's fulfilled that vow, for good or ill. From school to the polls to birth control, Sanders hasn't simply ruled. She's fought a war of policy. She's rammed through broad education reforms, rewritten voting laws identified as discriminatory by civil rights organizations, curbed LGBTQ+ protections, and cut back on corporate regulations. Critics and constitutional scholars caution that a lot of these are not only contentious, but downright unconstitutional. Sanders has repeatedly dismissed those concerns as liberal hyperbole. But there is something more ominous in the works behind the scenes. Because erase the twist, Sanders isn't only thinking of Arkansas. She's thinking about the White House. Yes, quietly, but unmistakably, she's been positioning herself as a future presidential candidate. National speaking tours, frequent Fox News appearances, keynote addresses at conservative conferences. The story is being written. She applied Trump's vision at the state level and can do the same on the national level. But that means something serious. Presidential contenders aren't simply critiqued on their politics or policies. They're also supposed to grasp, deeply, the Constitution they swear to defend. And with constitutional experts already challenging the legality of Sanders' policies, her lack of legal foundations may be more than a flaw. It may be a fault. That's why this moment on CNN was so significant, because when Sanders entered into constitutional debate, she wasn't ready for the courtroom-level firepower Crockett carried with her. One arrived with talking points. The other arrived with precedent. And when those two forces met in a live shot, only one emerged with their credibility intact. This CNN segment was meant to be Sarah Huckabee Sanders' moment in the sun, an opportunity to solidify her national reputation as a tough, policy-oriented governor. The subject? Perfect for her image, state versus federal government power. A pillar of conservative thought. She came on set with scripted talking points, poll-tested words regarding states' rights and federal overreach, convinced that she'd be the one calling the shots. But the surprise for Sanders was not an alternative type of opponent, one who wasn't armed with spin, but with facts. Facing her was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a constitutional litigator with a decade of experience in the courtroom and an unflappable grasp of the law. What had started out as a mundane political discussion became a live television legal showdown, one that would leave Sanders visibly shaken and Crockett lauded by legal experts across the country. The disparity was impossible to ignore. On one side, a seasoned attorney with a decade of experience in constitutional litigation. On the other hand, a savvy political communicator with no legal chops. Sanders was going to learn that in a live constitutional debate, media coaching can't compete with mastery of the law. From the very beginning, the tone had been set, and the unraveling had started. Anderson Cooper introduced the segment in a relaxed enough manner, bringing on the guests and establishing the conversation around a timely subject, escalating tensions between state governments and the Biden administration. A number of Republican governors had been pushing back against federal policy, citing the 10th Amendment in their own defense. Sanders jumped in first, confident and composed. Dressed in a sharp navy blazer, she sat upright, speaking with the cadence of someone who'd spent years answering tough questions from the press. Anderson, what we're seeing from this administration is a complete disregard for the 10th Amendment, she began, her Southern drawl lending weight to her message. The Constitution is clear. Powers not specifically granted to the federal government belong to the states. That's Federalism 101. She leaned into her delivery, gesturing with authority as she continued. In Arkansas, we've passed common-sense laws to protect our citizens from Washington's one-size-fits-all mandates. When the federal government overreaches, it's our duty to push back. But then, it was Jasmine Crockett's turn, and the energy in the studio shifted. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't interrupt. She didn't posture. She just leaned forward, palms together, eyes locked in the intensity of a woman who'd cross-examined dozens of witnesses under fire. Anderson, I appreciate Governor Sanders' passion. She started out, her voice firm and level, her Texas twang carrying the soft gravity of courtroom stature. But I think there's a misperception, not necessarily about political philosophy, but about what the Constitution says and what some wanted to say. The smile slipped from Sanders, just a little. A tiny clench of the jaw. The first indications that this was not going to be the run-through she had anticipated. Crockett moved on. The 10th Amendment doesn't give states the right to trump federal law. That's not federalism. The Supremacy Clause, Article 6, establishes federal law as the highest law of the land when Congress operates within its constitutional authority. And then came the sting. What Governor Sanders is outlining isn't states' rights, it's nullification theory. And that argument was settled more than a century ago. And in that way, the discussion turned from abstract to literal, and Sanders was on the back foot. The governor's instincts took over. She'd been questioned by the world's toughest press corps and emerged unscathed. She wasn't going to let a first-term congresswoman embarrass her on TV. Congresswoman Crockett, with all due respect, Sanders cut in, her tone edged and sharp. You're mischaracterizing Arkansas's position. We're not nullifying anything. We're asserting our sovereignty, something the Constitution clearly protects. But Crockett wasn't flustered. In fact, she seemed emboldened. "I'd be more than happy to talk about sovereignty," she replied, calmly reaching for her phone. "But let's use real examples." And then came the hammer. "Your state just adopted a bill that is directly in opposition to existing federal civil rights protections," Crockett charged, locking eyes with Sanders. "That's not sovereignty. That's a textbook constitutional violation." At that point, the studio air shifted. Even Cooper leaned forward, realizing this was no longer a debate, it was a matter of law. Sanders' face reddened. Her poised delivery broke. Because this wasn't a pundit speculating. This was a civil rights lawyer presenting evidence. On live television. And there was no scripted answer for that. What Sanders wasn't expecting, and did not often see, was being challenged not on politics, but on legal substance. Particularly not by a person who could recite particular constitutional provisions from memory, in real time. She attempted to resist. "I believe you're going too far here, Congresswoman," Sanders intoned, her tone growing tighter with annoyance. "Being a sitting governor, I believe I have a better idea of state power than one who's only been in Congress for less than 2 years. But in court, when one goes personal rather than refuting the argument, that's usually the strongest indication they're losing." And Jasmine Crockett knew it right away. "Governor Sanders," she added, tone now sharp with the precision of a veteran lawyer, "this is not about time in office. It's about constitutional law." The tone had changed, no longer debating, but issuing the sort of legal rebuke you might hear in front of a federal judge. "And since you mentioned qualifications, I spent 15 years practicing constitutional law before arriving in Congress. I've actually tried these cases in federal court." The remark was measured, understated, but lethal. Sanders had stepped squarely into a trap criticizing the attorney credentials of a person who had made a whole career out of constitutional litigation, when she herself had none. And she knew it. Even Anderson Cooper sensed the change. Feeling the weight of the moment, he edged forward. "Governor Sanders," he spoke, not raising his voice, "Congresswoman Crockett makes a particular legal point concerning federal supremacy. What do you have to say to it?" Sanders attempted to rally, but the ground was crumbling away from her. "Look, Anderson," she told him, "this is just the sort of elitist mentality we see emanating from Washington. They believe that they are smarter than the people who put us in office, smarter than state governments." It was the usual turn to politics, but Crockett wasn't going to let her flee into catchphrases. "Governor, I respect your dignity, but this has absolutely nothing to do with elitism," cut in Crockett fluidly. Her voice was now pointed, that of a constitutional attorney not about to stand for a misstatement. "This is about the Constitution's actual text. You can't use the 10th Amendment and disregard the Supremacy Clause, the Commerce Clause, and the 14th Amendment. That's not constitutional law." The debate was rapidly becoming a one-way cross-examination, and the studio buzz made it certain. This was no debate anymore. This was a dismantling, measured, methodical, unavoidable. Sanders grew visibly uncomfortable, eyes flashing as Crockett's points in law fell one after another. And Crockett? She wasn't done yet. "In fact," she said, now fully commanding the room, "some of Arkansas's recent legislation appears to violate multiple constitutional provisions. Have your legal advisors walked you through the likely federal challenges? Because they're coming." Then came the moment that would make the internet explode. Rather than deferring to legal experts or acknowledging the complexity, Sanders doubled down. "Congresswoman," she snapped back, "I don't take lectures from Washington politicians regarding what Arkansas can and cannot do. We know our rights, and we're going to fight for them." And that was the killing error. Crockett hesitated, for just an instant. Those familiar with courtrooms knew it in an instant. It was that hesitation. The hesitation before the knockout blow. "Governor Sanders," she spoke slowly now, her voice heavy with the unmistakable force of legal authority. "With all due respect, it's beginning to be evident that you don't actually know the law that you're attempting to uphold." Silence. The studio went completely quiet. Even Cooper, a seasoned pro at high-pressure interviews, appeared taken aback for a moment. Sanders' face fell. Her shoulders slumped. Her face went pale. She'd come to discuss politics, and ended up having her constitutional arguments shot down, and the world was watching. The stage was set. What followed would become one of the most devastating legal takedowns in cable news history. Cuts of the exchange would accumulate millions of views within hours, picked apart by legal commentators, analyzed in constitutional law classrooms, and referenced by academics as a casebook example of the importance of actual expertise in political discourse. What they were about to see wasn't merely a clash of ideology. It was a living illustration of how the Constitution isn't merely a prop. Crockett leaned forward, instincts on high alert. She had been here before, in courtrooms, across from adversaries who went wild with sweeping, unsubstantiated assertions about the law. She knew when to hit back, and how to do so with precision. Governor Sanders, she started, voice steady but with intent pulsing beneath the surface. If you keep raising the specter of state power, I have a particular constitutional question to pose. This was not political theater. This was cross-examination on national television. Under what constitutional provision, Crockett asked, does Arkansas assert the authority to nullify federal civil rights protection? Sanders blinked. The question stung more than she anticipated. She had been trained in hostile interviews, in political spin. But not this, not a straightforward constitutional question from a lawyer who actually worked federal law. Sure, the 10th Amendment specifically says, Sanders started, trying to find ground. But Crockett didn't give her a chance. The 10th Amendment, Crockett snapped, preserves states' powers that are not enumerated for the federal government. But civil rights aren't among them. She broke and landed the punch. Civil rights are guaranteed under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and Congress has enforcement authority under Section 5 of that amendment. That makes it necessarily federal. And then the question came that made the studio go silent. So what provision of the Constitution, Crockett asked, voice firm, are you relying on to argue that Arkansas can override those federal civil rights protections? You could hear a pin drop. Sanders froze, visibly recognizing that she had walked into a legal trap she couldn't bluff her way out of. Her reply came not in facts, but fallback rhetoric. Look, she said, her voice dwindling of its edge, this is the very type of legal gymnastics Washington employs to. Governor, this is not gymnastics, Crockett said, interrupting her once more. Her voice was now firm, final, unshakable. This is elementary constitutional law, the stuff they teach in first-year law school. Even Anderson Cooper leaned in, totally absorbed by what was now less a political debate and more a live, one-sided masterclass. But Crockett wasn't done. She had discovered Sanders' Achilles heel, and now she was about to reveal it in its entirety. Let me make this even simpler, she said, unlocking her phone. I'm looking at Arkansas Act 1002, which your administration signed last month. She scrolled briefly, then looked up. Section 3 directly contradicts the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Section 7 violates the Voting Rights Act. And Section 12? It outright ignores Supreme Court precedent from Brown v. Board of Education. Sanders' face red. The deflections weren't panning out. Her usual flow was off. Our legal staff reviewed that law in depth, she asserted, her voice breaking slightly under stress. Crockett arched an eyebrow. Did they? She retorted, voice cool, unimpressed. Because any first-year law student could have caught these constitutional overreaches. And thus the debate was done. Not with a bang, but with a legal mic drop. Did your legal team explain that this law is likely to be struck down in federal court within 6 months? The question landed with the weight of a gavel. It hung in the air like a blade, suspended between two very different versions of authority, one political, the other legal. Sanders looked around the studio, her eyes scanning for backup that wasn't coming. She finally spoke, but the confidence was gone. Our attorneys are assured of Arkansas law, she responded, her voice softer, more pinched, as if she no longer had faith in it herself. And that's when Jasmine Crockett landed the killer punch. Governor Sanders, she said, each syllable sharp with certitude, I don't think you realize what you just stated. She wasn't furious. She wasn't flamboyant. She was merely reciting facts, the ones that cut deeper than any insult. You're expressing confidence in a law that directly violates multiple constitutional provisions. That's not state sovereignty. That's constitutional ignorance. The words hit like a lightning strike. Sanders went pale. Her face betrayed the recognition of what had just happened, that she'd been laid bare, live on national television, by someone who actually knew the law she'd been attempting to defend. But Crockett wasn't finished. And additionally, she went on, her voice unyielding, your constant invoking of the 10th Amendment demonstrate a basic misunderstanding of how federalism really operates. Next was the phrase that would be read in newsrooms, classrooms, and courtrooms nationwide. The Constitution isn't a buffet where states get to pick and choose which federal laws they feel like following. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a legal education. Live, brutal, unavoidable. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, clearly sensing that he was witnessing more than just political friction. Congresswoman, he asked carefully, you're essentially saying Governor Sanders doesn't understand constitutional law. Crockett turned toward him, then back to Sanders, her tone serious, but not cruel. Anderson, she said, I'm saying that Governor Sanders appears confused about basic constitutional principles. And that confusion becomes dangerous when you're responsible for state policy affecting millions of people. Sanders, now flustered and increasingly desperate, tried one last political counterattack. This is exactly the kind of elitist, condescending attitude Washington uses to silence real Americans and the people who represent them. But Crockett wasn't moved. She cut in, not with emotion, but with fact, precision, and the authority of someone who's spent their life practicing real law. Governor, she said flatly, you don't know the law. You've spent this entire segment making demonstrably false claims about constitutional authority while citing provisions that don't remotely support your position. That's not condescending. That's factual. Then came the hammer, and it's perilous when someone in your role rules with that degree of ignorance. The studio air became thick, loaded not with drama, but import. Sanders' expression shifted again, this time from ire to awareness. A cold, white acknowledgement crept in. She'd been carefully, systematically taken apart, not by ideological opinion, but by constitutional fact. Cooper sat in silence for a moment, allowing the moment to breathe. A veteran journalist, he knew exactly what had just transpired and what it was going to become. The silence was total. No one stirred. No one spoke. And viewers nationwide could almost hear the stillness, the sort of amazed quiet that only follows something historic. But Crockett wasn't finished yet. She drew a breath and gave the last lesson. Moreover, Governor, she added, voice steady and authoritative as a professor laying out the reasons for a final exam failure. Your constant assertions regarding Arkansas sovereignty demonstrate a basic misapprehension of how constitutional federalism truly works. Her gaze remained fixed. The Constitution isn't a cafeteria line. States don't pick and choose which federal laws to obey based on politics. That's precisely why the Supremacy Clause is there, to avoid selective constitutional observance. Sanders parted her lips to answer. Nothing emerged. She remained motionless, mouth agape, transfixed by the power of a dialogue that had careened far outside politics, into the domain of constitutional fact she just wasn't ready to face. And so the debate was over, not with applause, but with stunned silence. The kind that only follows absolute clarity. Just let me know how you'd like it delivered. Feeling the weight of history in the moment, Anderson Cooper leaned in and asked the question that would soon be quoted in newsrooms, classrooms, and social media streams everywhere. Congresswoman Crockett, are you essentially telling a sitting governor that she doesn't understand the Constitution she swore to uphold? Crockett turned to Cooper, then back to Sanders. Her expression was firm, not angry, not mocking, more like a professor disappointed in a student who hadn't done the reading. Anderson, she began, voice steady and authoritative, I'm stating a demonstrable fact, based entirely on Governor Sanders' own words in this segment. Repeatedly, she has asserted constitutional law that is not merely arguable, it is legally wrong. And when government officials get the very Constitution they're sworn to protect wrong, that's not a political disagreement. That's a civic crisis, and it impacts every citizen they're leading. That was like a lightning bolt. Sanders attempted to come up with a response, but it sounded weak, bordering on hollow. I support Arkansas law and our constitutional rights as a sovereign state. Even that final effort at distraction revealed the source of the trouble, a basic misunderstanding of how sovereignty is practiced in the U.S. federal system. As any first-year law student could have told him, states don't exist as separate countries. They exist within a constitutional system with defined limits on their powers. And Crockett was aware of that. She should most likely be hearing from actual constitutional attorneys, Crockett stated matter-of-factly, rather than political strategists. Then came the zinger that would hurt the most. Because today, Arkansas taxpayers are going to spend millions defending legislation which any competent lawyer would have been able to advise her were unconstitutional. It was straightforward. It was precise. And it was crushing. Governor Sanders, once poised, confident, and media-schooled, now seemed to wish to disappear. The unflappable executive who had walked into the studio had given way to a person who knew, in her guts, that she had been revealed on national TV. Governor Sanders, final statement? Cooper asked, nearly kindly now. A hesitation. Sanders breathed, and offered the weakest answer of the evening. I stand by Arkansas law. And with that, the moment, blessedly for Sanders, was over. But the damage had been done. Within minutes, just shy of 15, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett destroyed Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders' constitutional claims, revealed an abiding ignorance of federal law, and had delivered one of the most comprehensive political takedowns in cable news history. And when the CNN cameras went dark, the internet blew up. Clips of Crockett's devastating takedown of Sanders started trending on all social platforms. The most meme-worthy quote, "You don't know the law." One simple sentence was clipped, captioned, memed, TikToked, stitched, remixed, and posted millions of times on every corner of the internet. Hashtag Crockett School Sanders trended on Twitter within 30 minutes, fast rising to the top of international charts. Legal Twitter erupted first. Constitutional law professors, civil rights lawyers, and even federal judges, people who don't often venture into political commentary, began to chime in. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe posted on Twitter, "This is what happens when real legal expertise confronts empty political bluster." And the accolades just kept coming. Legal blogs, opinion pieces, reaction videos. Everyone was discussing what they'd just seen. Not just a political argument. Not just a viral clip. Constitutional law masterclass, broadcast live on national television. Just say the word. The next thing that happened made a viral moment into a national reckoning. While the video of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's evisceration of Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders kept spreading, legal analysts, civil rights groups, and constitutional scholars alike were all part of the chorus of reactions to what they'd just seen. Harvard Law's Lawrence Tribe had already tweeted his admiration for the exchange, but others soon followed. The American Civil Liberties Union posted the video with a sharp caption, "When politicians invoke constitutional power without knowing it, that's why legal knowledge is important." A great deconstruction by Rep. Jasmine Crockett. And then the most revealing indicator of effect, 10 million views in mere hours. The hashtag You Don't Know the Law hashtag wasn't trending. It was a rallying cry among lawyers, law professors, and enraged citizens who were sick of seeing political leaders use the Constitution as a prop to score partisan political points. But most surprising fallout might have not been the left's, but from the conservative legal community itself, splitting apart. While Sanders' political friends ran to her defense with the typical sound bites, labeling Crockett as elitist, accusing D.C. of arrogance, and designating it a hit job, legal experts on the right were put in a bind. They couldn't defend Sanders' legal arguments without tainting their own credibility. Even Senator Tom Cotton chimed in, tweeting, "Just another Washington attorney looking down his nose at elected governors." Sarah Huckabee Sanders represents Arkansas values, not D.C. lawyer games. But Cotton's tweet didn't quite hit the mark. Conservative lawyers quickly shot back, reminding him that constitutional law isn't a game. It's the foundation of American government. And then came the silence that spoke volumes. The Federalist Society, whose members are known to loudly defend Republican legal positions, remained silent. For days. When they finally issued a statement, it was carefully worded, in defense of the concept of federalism, yes, but pointedly eschewing any endorsement of Sanders' actual arguments. It was the legal version of backing away slowly, and even some of their most renowned scholars defected. Federalist Society co-founder Stephen Calabrese wrote a point-by-point analysis. "As much as I disagree with Representative Crockett's politics, her constitutional analysis was accurate. Governor Sanders' reading of the 10th Amendment wasn't merely incorrect. It demonstrated a basic misunderstanding of American federalism. But the sharpest blow came from Josh Blackman, a right-leaning constitutional expert who often gets summoned to justify Republican legislation. He didn't mince words. This is a masterclass in the importance of legal expertise in public service. You can't assert constitutional authority you don't know. Governor Sanders should have taken advice from actual constitutional lawyers before making public statements she couldn't legally substantiate. That stung. And it wasn't just words. It was replicated in action. The American Bar Association reposted the clip, highlighting how it illustrated the value of legal literacy within political conversation. State bar organizations across the nation started adding the clip to continuing legal education, CLE, courses on constitutional law. Law schools experienced an immediate surge in interest. Admissions representatives indicated a significant increase in the number of applicants, citing Jasmine Crockett's performance as an inspiration. Universities even included the clip in their marketing materials, a demonstration of how legal education enforces real-world accountability. In classroom lecture halls, the debate became mandatory viewing in constitutional law classes, employed to demonstrate legal overreach hazards, federal supremacy functions, and political slogans v. legal fact. In brief, Jasmine Crockett overnight became a legal icon. But while Crockett soared, Sanders' political star began to fall. The ramifications are felt harshly and quickly. Sarah Huckabee Sanders had been quietly constructing the infrastructure for a possible 2028 presidential run. Donor networks, grassroots operatives, and media alliances. But now, her constitutional credibility, that essential prerequisite for higher office, was in shambles. Political experts on both sides were starting to pose the uncomfortable question out loud. Can one who misapprehends the Constitution this egregiously be trusted with national leadership? CNN legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin boiled it down to the essence. That wasn't just a political loss. It was one of the most complete, methodical legal demolitions I've ever seen broadcast on television. Proceed. But this was never simply a viral moment. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a political argument. She gave a constitutional intervention on national TV. The real significance of what went down started to become clear not only for viewers, but for legal experts and policymakers across the country. MSNBC's Ari Melber, an active attorney himself, devoted an entire segment to breaking down what he termed a masterclass in legal accountability. This is what happens when real legal training collides with unbridled political oratory, Melber said. Crockett didn't debate. She cross-examined. She insisted on clarity. She revealed contradiction. And most of all, she brought the Constitution into the argument. And the repercussions? They weren't limited to rhetoric. Within 48 hours, the actual legal consequences started. 3 individual federal lawsuits were initiated, all challenging Arkansas laws which Crockett had berated on that now-famous CNN segment. Leading civil rights organizations, such as the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, adopted Crockett's on-air arguments verbatim into their court briefs. Her on-air comments were used as evidence that the state was not merely trespassing against the Constitution, they were knowingly doing so. More incriminatory still was the suit brought by the Southern Poverty Law Center, which adopted Crockett's specific constitutional objections as the skeleton of its legal action. As Representative Crockett rightly pointed out, their complaint stated, Arkansas Act 1002 constitutes multiple violations of constitutional provisions, including the Equal Protection Clause and federal civil rights laws. The governor's refusal to stand on these laws legally is a testament to their own awareness of their illegality. The threat of legal hurricanes was gathering, and off the record, the backlash was worse. Freedom of Information Act requests uncovered internal messages from the Arkansas Attorney General's office. What they revealed was appalling. In one exposed email, the state's top lawyer warned in blunt terms, these provisions clearly violate federal constitutional protections and will likely be struck down in court. We should reconsider this legislation. And the response of the governor's office? Cold, calculated, political. The governor desires to proceed without regard for legal issues, Sanders' chief of staff wrote. Those 7 words would come back to haunt the administration for months to come. Because now, they weren't just arguing about bad laws. They were arguing about bad laws they'd been specifically told were unconstitutional. Crockett had warned them all. On tape. In real time. And it was that clarity, that fearless and exacting statement of constitutional law, that transformed the trajectory of her political life overnight. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just trending, she was rising. Democratic Party leaders paid attention instantly. Producers of cable news shows started booking her for legal perspective on nightly roundtables. Law schools swarmed her office with speaking requests, inviting her to speak to students about the intersection of legal skill and public service. And then came the formal honors. A week later, she was named to the House Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties, among the most esteemed legal roles in Congress. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries described it as a natural fit, saying she is exceptional legal mind, fierce clarity, a voice we need at the constitutional table. And in the academic community, Crockett's moment was not simply a case study, it was a standard. Paul Butler, a professor at Georgetown Law, provided this breakdown. Crockett didn't just make a legal argument. She modeled textbook constitutional advocacy. She asked narrow questions. She demanded legally precise answers. She cited the right authorities and refused to let vague political talking points pass for legal reasoning. Harvard's Lawrence Tribe took it further. What made Crockett's performance so impressive wasn't what she knew. It was her insistence that constitutional law is not opinion-based. It's a framework. It's an agreement. It's binding. And she would not let it be manipulated into partisan PR. Law schools nationwide started adding the clip to their lists of mandatory viewing, not only in constitutional law classes, but in legal ethics, advocacy training, and public policy seminars. Because what Crockett illustrated wasn't merely competence. It was accountability in action. On to the next one. But Crockett's influence didn't stop at viral celebrity or legal critique. It was made into a teaching instrument across subjects. Universities everywhere started using the exchange as a case study in public accountability by professors of communication, political science, and law. At Yale Law School, the video was added to their trial advocacy curriculum right away. Professor Uka Lamar, one of the country's leading constitutional scholars, said, "Students must observe how legal accuracy can deconstruct political spin." What Crockett illustrated, precise questions, precise citations, zero tolerance for evasion, is what we instruct in every advocacy course. Political science departments around the country analyzed the segment to demonstrate how expertise must inform public discourse, rather than partisan showmanship. And it wasn't limited to America. The global legal community took notice. Constitutional law instructors in Canada, Australia, and the U.S. integrated the clip into their teaching of American federalism. The University of Oxford's American Studies program took it further, inviting Representative Crockett to lecture on the place of legal expertise in democratic governance. What made the moment so particularly compelling? Media critics said it was a remarkable case in which truth not only survived the din of cable television, but cut right through it. Unlike most political arguments, in which vague talking points and strategic evasions reigned supreme, Crockett approached the segment as a court hearing. She required specificity. She referenced case law and constitutional provisions. She wouldn't allow political speech to pass as legal reality. The Washington Post's media critic Margaret Sullivan captured it best. This exchange demonstrates what political journalism can be, if we insisted that politicians provide the same kind of clarity that we expect from lawyers in court. The New York Times editorial board reiterated that in saying that the moment was one in which higher standards for American political discourse could be called out. When politicians invoke the Constitution, they must be willing to back up those assertions with the same level of rigor expected in federal court. Representative Crockett reminded the country why legal precision in public policy isn't a matter of choice, it's foundational. Even international media had their say. The BBC highlighted how the moment highlighted an abiding lack of constitutional literacy among American political figures. The Guardian stated, Crockett's careful deconstruction of Governor Sanders' claims exposed a disturbing disconnect between political rhetoric and legal fact. In any effective democracy, such an act should cause immediate questions regarding the qualifications of public representatives. And for Governor Sanders, the political repercussions just got worse. Her ratings in Arkansas dropped, not only among educated college voters, but across the board. Why? Because anyone watching the clip could identify just how out of her element she seemed. Regional Arkansas newspapers started publishing excoriating editorials. Does our governor even get the legal basis of the policies that she advocates? But more importantly, the harm wasn't merely local. Her carefully crafted national image, established in anticipation of a 2028 presidential candidacy, was now in shambles. Early Republican primary polls reported a dramatic turnaround. Voters increasingly mentioned constitutional awareness as an overriding consideration in judging possible candidates. And every time Sanders tried to clarify her stance, it simply reminded viewers of her 15-minute constitutional meltdown on live television. Backstage, the Arkansas Republican Party started considering a question never before imagined. Do we begin searching for a new standard-bearer? Internal surveys reported the same thing over and over. Even voters who were conservative, particularly those who had any consciousness of the law, thought Sanders' constitutional integrity had been irreparably destroyed. And so, one televised discussion became something much more than a political event. It became a turning point in political responsibility, in judicial education, and in how we hold public officials accountable for using the Constitution they are sworn to defend. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't simply win an argument. She demonstrated to the country and the world a lesson in leadership based on the law. Behind the scenes, the consequences were fast and ruthless. Major right-wing donors, several of whom had been grooming Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders for a possible 2028 presidential campaign, started secretly redirecting their resources to other places. One prominent GOP fundraiser informed Politico, "You can't run for president when the internet has a clip of you getting ripped apart on basic constitutional law. That's not a political mistake. That's a disqualifying flaw in judgment." And the repercussions weren't only political. Just as Representative Jasmine Crockett had cautioned, Arkansas taxpayers were left holding the bag. With several federal courts enjoining Sanders' champion laws, the state was obligated to settle civil rights lawsuits, costing millions in legal fees. According to court filings, plaintiffs' attorneys used Sanders' own words from the CNN segment as proof of the state's knowing disregard of constitutional safeguards. But most significance of that exchange, it altered political journalism itself. Producers on cable networks started reevaluating how they report on constitutional matters. Rather than booking politicians exclusively to talk about complicated legal issues, they began inviting on real-life legal scholars, individuals with the qualifications and education to clearly and correctly explain the law. For Jasmine Crockett, the viral moment wasn't a quick political flash, it was a starting point. Contrary to the usual soundbites that catch fire and burn out quickly, her moment contained substance. It was anchored in legal reality, not partisan theatrics, and it established one thing definitively: balance-scale expertise remains important. In an era where the substance of things has all too often given way to soundbites, Crockett reminded everyone that if politicians are going to invoke the Constitution, they'd best be prepared to justify those arguments under actual legal scrutiny, because someone like her will be ready. Months later, while giving a guest lecture at a law school, Crockett captured it so well. The Constitution isn't some political slogan you can twist to fit your agenda. It's law. And if you're going to claim constitutional authority, you better know what you're talking about. As for Governor Sanders, he slipped in new legal advisors under the radar and noticeably avoided talking about constitutional issues in every subsequent interview. The formerly confident leader who had marched into that CNN studio learned a tough lesson. The disconnect between political rhetoric and legal acumen can be calamitous when revealed on a national platform. And so, this viral exchange was more than a trending moment. It was a case study. A case study in why policy should follow expertise, why voters need to hold their elected officials accountable, and how legal knowledge can transform national discourse. If you enjoyed watching Jasmine Crockett tear apart political speak with actual legal firepower, hit that like button and subscribe for additional political deep dives separating fact from fiction. What did you think of this epic teardown? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We read all of them. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss the next time a politician gets schooled on the Constitution. Do you have any guesses on who the next political figure will be to get a real-time legal reality check? Let us know your guesses below.